Okay, so now we have attachment disruption. This is about deprivation, privation, and institutionalization.
So let's just outline deprivation here. This is where a child used to have an attachment figure, but the attachment figure is separated from the child, thus the child is deprived of the attachment.
They are, and we can cut this down to separation, which is the short-term effects, and deprivation, which is the long-term effects. So separation involves distress when separated from an attachment figure, just for a relatively short period of time. And to explain this,
we can use the case study of John.
We can.
So John was 17 months old when his mum went into hospital to give birth. He was put into a residential nursery for 9 days. To begin with, he sort of competed for the nurse's attention. He was filmed and observed by psychologists. He cried when he got no attention.
This is the protest stage?
Yes. He tried to attach to a large teddy bear.
Which is the despair stage.
When he couldn't get attention. And then when his mother returned after 9 days, he resisted the comforting attempts, and up to 2 months later, he was still having angry outbursts at her.
He was, and this is the detachment stage. So those stages that I've just outlined there constitute the PDD model of the stages of separation. So just to outline that again, you've got protest, when he was crying and refusing food and drink. Despair, he had decided to attach to a teddy bear out of desperation, didn't know what to do. And then detachment, when he was resisting his mother, when he returned, and angry outbursts, which is withdrawal. Protest, despair, and detachment.
So let's just evaluate the case study of John.
Let's.
So to begin with, ethical issue, he's too young to give informed consent.
He is. He was just a little babby.
Aye. Poor John.
Also, it was a case study, so not necessarily generalisable. Could have had individual differences. Might just be a special boy.
However, a positive point would be that these were naturalistic observations, because they were just observing real-life events.
They were high in mundane realism.
Aye. Sorry, you can.
All right. They eliminated the observer bias by filming the observations so that other psychologists could inspect and check the observations.
This influenced childcare practices. It's now ensured that children have regular visits from family and friends.
Yep, and then if we move on to deprivation, the long-term effects here, we have the maternal deprivation hypothesis, which assumes that breaking the maternal bond with the child during the early years of its life has serious effects on its intellectual, social, and emotional development, which could be irreversible. And when I say early years of the life, I mean up to about 2.5 years.
Okay, let's look at the study of 44 juvenile thieves. In an emotional behavioural disorder unit, there were 44 thieves and 44 controls who were not thieves, I guess.
Yep.
A third of the thieves and none of the controls were diagnosed with affectionist psychopathy, which is a lack of remorse, guilt, and empathy. Over 80% of the thieves had experienced deprivation, and only 20% of the controls had experienced deprivation.
So this concludes that deprivation is probably what caused them to be thieves, or at least that's what they were saying.
Or it increases the likelihood.
Yes, it's probably better.
Yeah.
My grammar is great. Okay, let's evaluate this. It was a retrospective study, so they look back on these events rather than doing it at the time. So they could be influenced by distorted memories, which is a bad point. Another bad point is that it's correlational, so it assumed a cause and effect, despite only 27 out of 44 of the thieves not actually suffering from maternal deprivation. And also, confounding variables may have occurred, so the reason for separation could also be the reason for affectionist psychopathy, which could be a different reason.
Awesome.
So they're all bad points.
Let's go on to privation and institutionalization.
Okay, privation is the lack of having any attachments due to the failure in developing any attachments during early life.
For example, there's a case study of Jeannie, who was locked in her room for 12 years, ever since she was a wee babby. She couldn't walk properly and had very limited language skills. She was strapped to a potty and had no interaction with other human beings, so no attachment. The long-term effects of this experience for her were that she never achieved normal functioning.
That's quite sad, actually.
It is.
That study. But let's evaluate it. It's probably not very good because of individual differences.
It's a case study, so it is prone to that.
It is.
Yeah.
Also, the parents actually claimed that Jeannie may have been born with learning difficulties. That was their reasoning behind doing this. So it could well be individual differences. Also,
Still not a great reason, though, is it?
Well, not really, but, still,
Sad.
individual differences. Bad thing.
Yep.
Also, Jeannie's best interests were probably not considered, especially after all of the controversial tests that she was put through afterwards by psychologists.
She had a hard life.
She did, and it was quite unfair, so that's bad ethical-wise.
Yes. So another case study that is an example of privation is the Czech Twins. Basically, two identical twin boys whose mother died, so they went into care until they were 18 months old. They then lived with a stepdad and stepmum, who locked them in a cellar, and they were starved and beaten. They were discovered at the age of 7. The negative
That's not
effects
very
of
nice.
this was something called deprivation dwarfism. So their growth was stunted as a result of emotional
Deprivation dwarfism is usually physically small. Wait. When children are usually physically small. One suggestion is that the lack of emotional care rather than poor nourishment is the cause of such dwarfism.
Yes. They also had a lack of conventional speech, but would I be right in thinking that they had a way of communicating with each other, didn't they?
I think so. Yeah, but we'll move on to that in the evaluation.
Yeah, okay. They completely recovered after being adopted and could form attachments as they both married. That's lovely, isn't it? So there were only short-term effects of privation here.
There were. So if we evaluate this, like you said about the speech, they may have formed attachments with each other. So not necessarily complete privation occurred. And also it's case study, so it's not generalisable, and individual differences.
Okay.
So if we move on to institutionalisation, we have...
When children are placed in an orphanage and do not go home and grow up in care.
You took those words right out of my mouth.
I did. Literally.
Okay, study for this is the longitudinal study of 65 children in care homes. They had 50 different carers by the age of 4, and no attachments were formed by the age of 4.
Sad.
25 were restored to their biological families, 33 were adopted, and 7 were fostered. And at 8 years, they found that 20 of the 21 adoptees and 7 of the 13 restored children had formed close attachments. And similar results for the families at 16 years. So basically, it suggests that privation can be reversed if extra effort is put in.
Hooray! Now, there's a problem with this study. We call it attrition, which is where people drop out, leaving behind a biased sample of people who sort of have a particular personality that means they don't drop out.
Yeah, so basically the people that drop out probably have the similar traits to the people that don't drop out, so you're left with a biased sample.
Yes. A positive point, evaluation point, is that this is a natural experiment. It has real-life application.
It does, but on the other hand, there could be confounding variables, such as individual differences and things that get in the way.
Yes.
And that concludes attachments overall. And
I've said it
means
before.
Only...
I will say it again. Hooray!
So now we only have daycare left, which is the last podcast in the whole of Unit 1.
Woo!
Then you'll be ready for your exam.